Take us away.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the latecomers here on healthierlife.tv. My name is Warren Conley. I'm your co host coming to you from a very autumny Hungary, and my co presenter is.
Paul Bursey from London.
Nice to see you, nice Pearl. So, today we're going to be talking about ADHD, okay, in particular for children. Does your child, he or she, struggle with paying attention? I never really understood that expression, paying attention, but I don't know where that came from. I must look that up and find out where the source for that expression comes from. But yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, bear in mind, I mean, most of us had problems paying attention. So, but this is taking it a bit further, isn't it? So,
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the expression "paying attention." Where does it
yeah,
originate from? I mean, why
probably
would
from,
you be
probably from
paying for
school
attention?
teachers.
Yeah,
Who
probably.
used to tell me to pay attention. So, in the 60s, some of them were quite violent as well. they'd,
Oh
throw,
yeah.
they'd throw bits of wood at you, the old eraser.
Oh,
For the,
all kinds of stuff. Pick you up by the ears. Yeah,
yeah.
my ears are not big, but they stick out quite a lot. I think that's because some of my teachers used to pick me up off the floor by my ears. But before we get into the talk today, it's just when I was doing my work on this, preparing for this, it just reminded me of one or two people in particular that I grew up with, that I've known through my life or used to know. And I look at them and I think, man, they must have had ADHD, But in those days, in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't something that was diagnosed at all or even considered really. You know, ADD came about in the 90s, I think it was. It became a popular term, so to speak. But I look back at the kids and how they were treated, these kids with ADHD. And when we get deeper into the conversation, we're going to talk about what are some of the causes for ADHD, and it really makes sense for me now. I think about how you know how we were abused as children, by our parents unknowingly. The damage that they were doing to us, and hopefully you'll understand as we talk about the causes later on. But I just feel for those guys that I went to school with that had ADHD,
Yeah.
because they were treated so badly, and it wasn't their fault. It was just that they had a condition, and so hopefully this will help to enlighten a little bit more about
Yeah, I
what
must say
can happen around it.
when I was first went to school, I don't remember anyone having too many problems. The only ones that used to get into the headmaster's office um, was myself and my later stepsister. We were in the
Oh,
same class, and
well, maybe that's why you never noticed it amongst other kids, because you were always the one in the headmaster's office.
yeah. But I was good as gold. I mean, I didn't do anything.
Ah,
I only got whacked
okay.
once.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So So ADHD, it's very common. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it starts normally in childhood. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, typically in childhood, I guess something maybe traumatic might need to happen to you for it to be, for it to develop in adulthood, if that's possible. I haven't checked up that far, down that rabbit hole yet, but because I was focusing on the kids. But yeah, I think, yeah, from childhood really, because it is also hereditary.
Yeah, they believe it's hereditary. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the things they can agree on. I think. But to be fair, I still think they're in the very early stages with the ADHD. Um, they know quite a bit, but they're not there yet. We know it's a constant challenge to keep studying, to keep finding ways of dealing with it, and then I don't. Obviously, you can't prevent it. I don't think you can help
Mhm.
definitely
Mhm.
by some things, and we'll come to that. But the big thing with ADHD is two things, isn't it? Really, because there's three types of ADHD. One is obviously the controlling impulsive behaviors and the aggressiveness and things like that, you know. And obviously, one's called predominantly inattentive.
Inattentive.
Yes. About not paying attention and things like that, and focus.
They're not necessarily disruptive in school or anything, anywhere like that, but they just don't pay attention.
Yeah, they could be off with the fairies, as I call it. That's my description. Yeah. Looking out the window, you know, and just daydreaming and things like that, you know. The second one is predominantly hyperactive, impulsive, and that's the second one. Or you get a combination of both.
Mm-hmm. There's three different types. Yeah,
it's quite. Sometimes they miss diagnosing people with ADHD in school, and it's picked up late when they become an adult. You know,
but also from my own experience and from my own understanding, not personal experience, but from my own understanding, is that I don't know about nowadays, but there was a time when every second kid was getting diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine them using it as I'm not saying they do, but I can imagine them using it as a overall thing. They say, "Well, he must have ADHD," you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so no, he's just annoying. You know, we're not making light of it, but I think you can be. People can be over-labelled sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
What you've got to do is come up.
We love labels, don't we?
Yeah, that's right. We do label people all the time. I mean, what we have to do is look at each individual case and have it done by a professional. You know, because again, we were talking about something else, and so you've got to be very careful with legal stuff. You know, and it has to be. You know, you've got to be qualified to be able to diagnose ADHD.
But it's not just this. That is obviously a huge part of it. But if you look at how they treat kids with ADHD.
Oh yeah.
I don't agree with any of the ways that they treat kids with ADHD, medically speaking. That is, you don't want your kid being diagnosed as ADHD, in my opinion, if they're not, because you know if they just have.
It is a label. There's no way around it.
And then they're going to get they're going to get this treatment that just it's draconian in many ways, in my opinion. You know, in terms of behavioral therapy. Being one, and then you've got the medication side of it. And if you look at what they actually use to medicate kids on ADHD, I wouldn't want my child on any of those medication drugs. No. I really wouldn't. You know, and if your child is not ADHD, you make sure, like you say, like Paul says, be very careful who's diagnosing your child.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with a teacher or someone else picking up on certain things that are happening to guide them in the right direction. That's how it should be, because you are going to see things with a child and say, well, that's not quite right, you know, and so you should then seek the professional help, you know, especially, I mean, simple little things like I said about looking out the window, having trouble paying attention to things. You might have a slight uncontrollable impulsive behavior that's not throwing chairs across the room, you know.
But again, impulsive behavior, it could also be a symptom of a child's expression, you know, their individuality.
Absolutely, yeah. And
it doesn't mean they have ADHD.
Yeah. But obviously, when we talk about a lot of this stuff, we're talking about the ones that stand out more than others.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the ones that they describe it as overly active, but we know that they do impulsive things sometimes. They get aggressive, and they're the ones that come to notice straight away. But there are the very quiet kids, I suppose, that could have ADHD on a minor scale, and they may not be picked up.
They just have the inattentive ADHD, right?
Yeah, maybe.
It's inattentive. They just can't pay attention in class, but they're not disruptive. They're not noisy. They're not on the go all the time. Because if you look at the symptoms of, okay, so let's go through what are the symptoms. Child that just cannot sit still.
Yeah.
It's like an Energizer bunny, 24/7, everywhere. They can't play quietly. All right. They just can't. And I've seen many kids like that just cannot play quietly. All right. They don't seem to listen. They squirm and fidget a lot all the time. Okay, you can't grab a child that's got ADHD and try to get them to sit still because they're going to try to break free from you all the time. They do interrupt and they are rude towards others because they intrude upon people's spaces very often. And then also they can't finish tasks either. They struggle to get through tasks because they're distracted a lot.
Yeah, but that's right. Because the patterns are disrupted, they're disorganized. Yes. It's not. You can't. In other words, you can't pigeonhole anyone.
No.
We're all unique. We're all individuals. And we all have things wrong with us. It's just that some are more obvious than others.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a serious mental problem. ADHD, and it can, if it's undiagnosed. It can, and you go into adulthood, it can be extremely dangerous. Especially when we get the influence of television adding on top of it and things like that.
Because that
they don't seem to care what's on telly now, do they?
What's that?
Well, the television companies don't seem to care what's on television. And there's some real bad things on there.
Yeah.
And
I look at I look at what my 11-year-old daughter watches and what she's been watching. If you just look at what kids have been watching since the 50s, if you just look at the first Mickey Mouse movies, it was violence. It was violence. If you look at what was the one where Mickey Mouse was on the boat and stuff like that, and it was like, even then, back in those days, they have so much violence on there, but because it's cartoons, it's animation, it seems to be socially acceptable, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to see a cartoon character's leg being chopped off or being decapitated, but you can't show them that with the real person happening, because now all of a sudden their paradigm is like, well, that's not right, but that is right. But why is there a difference? Why is there a difference in terms of acceptance of what is good and what's not good? Because if you put a kid in front of a screen that's got ADHD, and they start seeing somebody's leg being chopped off and they think it's funny because everyone's laughing, then what do you think what might happen further down the line?
That's right. And I think, and I'll put my hands up.
This is the difficulty, Paul, because there's no specific treatment, right?
No, that's right.
Diagnosis. There's no specific diagnosis for it.
There are some things you can do.
Yeah.
But to be fair, when I'm doing my research, they don't know a great deal. They know some things, so we're all learning together, and that is one of the reasons why you have to do it through a professional, because it's so early on in the process of trying to sort ADHD out, and everyone has to work together. That is comes across.
Whoever's involved, you need
parents, teachers, everyone. So doctors and things like that. But it is normal for children to have trouble focusing and bad behaviour on occasions. It's quite normal very early on. However, children with ADHD do not grow out of these behaviours. They can get worse. They can be severe. They can definitely cause difficulty at school. School seems to be the one where it seems to mushroom. But it also could be when they're with friends. They might be around a friend's house. It could be at home. And you would see, and you would definitely see changes in a person or things that are not going as well as they could do. So there are signs. That's what we're trying to say. So what else can a child with ADHD, what might they do apart from what you've said? Okay, let's just sort of go through them again so that people can maybe identify them. So it could be someone daydreaming a lot.
Yeah, it could be. Could be something that just cannot pay attention, as we said.
Yeah, yeah. As you mentioned earlier, squirm or fidget.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for kids to stay still anyway, you know. But you've got to be eagle-eyed, especially as a teacher or a parent, to make sure, that everything's going well. Talking too much, you mentioned, I think, as well.
Well, not being able to play quietly as such. So it's not necessarily talking too much.
Yeah, playing games and not going out of turn because you're
exactly. Yeah. They always want their turn, right?
Yeah. Keep making careless mistakes, taking unnecessary risks, because they can't tell the difference. Maybe, I don't know. Can you think of anything else?
I mean, I think we've touched on everything that's.
Oh, there was one. I remember low frustration, having no patience whatsoever.
And I think this can also be with everything that they're going through as a kid with ADHD. And the way that they may be getting dealt with by their caregiver or the parents or the teachers because they may not have been identified with it and they may not know how to deal with it. This could also lead to things like anxiety and depression as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the symptoms aren't being dealt with, the diagnosis or the condition is not being handled correctly, and then the child can become very disillusioned and then become depressed and anxious because they just feel like because I've seen it happen so many times where children just get blamed for everything. They get shouted at regularly. They get told that they've got to sit down and pay attention and listen quietly or whatever, and they can't. And it's no real fault of theirs because if you look at like what we mentioned, it's they reckon it's primarily, or not primarily, but it's most likely genetic. But there's also other factors that
yeah, that's right. I'm just going to come to them.
There's other factors that can be causing ADHD in kids, and for example, mothers that have a premature birth, or if the baby's born like underweight, if the mother consumes alcohol or tobacco, these kind of things, and this is why I said like so many kids when I was growing up, if I think back and I look back at it, I'm sure they had ADHD because all our parents smoked and drank alcohol when they were pregnant with us. Nobody gave a damn about drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes. It wasn't considered a risk factor. So, and I think I used to know a guy when I was at school, and his mother was a drug addict, and he came out physically healthy, but he just could not sit still. He was a lifeguard, and he was constantly in the water or running up and down the beach because he just couldn't sit still, and his mind would be racing all the time with weird and wonderful thoughts and ideas. And I think that's also a very clear indication that the abuse that his mother did to herself had an impact on his own health. Definitely, direct impact.
They also talk about brain injury as well. If you've got some kind of brain injury, now they don't. And exposure to environmental risks such as lead, and again they talk about during pregnancy. The mother as well. And they obviously, when you talk about somebody with ADHD, they start thinking about other things that might cause it. Things like eating too much sugar. Watching too much television. Well, they don't help, but I don't think they cause ADHD as far as I know. But some people do react to eating too much sugar. You get overactive. So it's.
Well, what's the condition that people may have? Sometimes they do warn you on certain shows or something. They say that there's flashing,
lighting.
Yeah, light sensitivity, right?
Yeah.
What is the condition that it causes? I
don't know what it
causes people to have like epileptic.
Yeah, it's similar to epilepsy. I mean, look, all I can say as a police officer, this only happened once in 33 years. I went to a scene of something. I might have been an accident or something, and the blue flashing lights got to me. I had to go lay in the back of the police car. It was so bad.
Oh
And
wow.
it was just once. Never ever happened again.
Okay.
No, I don't know. I can't. There are things that can happen. What about diagnosing? Again,
Well,
that's
this
got
is
to be
what.
for a professional.
Yeah, we covered it. I mean, there's no specific
Yeah,
diagnosis. It needs to be. There's a lot of steps that need to happen in conjunction with professionals and with the teachers. So everybody needs to be included, as you said, Paul, earlier. Everybody needs to be included. The parents, the grandparents, if possible, if needed, the caregivers or the school teachers, and the doctors as well. Everybody needs to be involved because there are so many steps and different, I don't know, situations they need to look at. It could just
yeah,
be a young kid thrashing out. Maybe the family's going through turmoil. So maybe somebody close to the kid has died recently, or the parents are divorcing, separating, or they've moved from one location to another. It could be a number of factors like this, and this is why they say
yeah,
it's also very difficult to diagnose it with preschoolers, because they are so easily influenced by external environments, and very often they play out on that, or they act out on that, and then they, so if kids are going through a home environment where it's quite traumatic for them, it may not be traumatic for the parents, but for the kid it could be huge. Then they act out, but that doesn't mean they have ADHD. It
no,
just means that they're frustrated and they're trying to get attention. So again, this is why it's so important to make sure that everybody that's involved in that child's life is involved in the conversation before the diagnosis is made.
yeah. That's right. I mean, look, there is no single test to diagnose ADHD.
Yeah, exactly.
They are more likely to obviously do a full medical exam, hearing, vision tests, things like that, and basically look at the history from the parents, and you'd have to take everything into account before jumping in, and I'm sure they don't jump in, but we don't want someone jumping in and saying, "Oh, you've got ADHD." It's got to. Although you want it diagnosed quickly, you've got to take time and actually, really go into it in a deep way to make sure you're giving the right diagnosis. Because the problem is there are other problems like anxiety, depression, sleep, and other things like that that are similar. Everything can be similar. So that's why you have to find out the proper history about someone and what they're currently doing. So. What about treatments? Do they have treatments for this? You mentioned
they do. This is what I was
as well.
Yeah. So you might have like an occupational therapist working with the child, or a psychologist, which they tend to go more towards. An occupational therapist has a different approach to a traditional psychologist would. And then there's also medication and drugs.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the types of drugs that they're using. I mean, Adderall, Vyvanse, Concerta, Ritalin. Daytrana. And then also for non-stimulant medication as well, Strattera.
They all sound horrible.
I'm not sure about, but
yeah. Because then they give. I know that. I remember when I was looking at it a bit last week. Ritalin was the one that came up more than anything.
Oh, the Ritalin has been used for years with kids.
Yeah.
For years.
Yeah, it didn't paint a great picture either.
No.
I'm not saying don't use it if the doctor says, but I'm just saying it just all the thing that came over was like warning bells and things like that, and I mean you can manage the symptoms up to a point. There is. I don't think there's any cure for it, as far as I know.
No, not as far as I'm aware not from my research. Yeah, and they say the data shows from kids that have been treated with medication and psychological
behavioral therapy and things like that.
Psychological work. They say that kids that have both included in their therapy, in their treatment of it, they tend to have better social skills. But the way I see it is all they're really doing is that they're conditioning the children how to behave.
Yeah.
And then they're drugging them to suppress what's going on in their brains, you understand? And they're not actually working on fixing anything. It's dumbing and dulling down those kids. And that's my personal view. That's
I get that.
That's what one-on-one. That's how one-on-one makes two for me in this scenario. Yes, the data shows that the kids will have better social skills, but you basically have a zombie walking around.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I mean, they talk about some of the healthy behaviors that may help. Now, it's funny that we go back to all these things on everything, and that is healthy eating habits.
Yes.
We talk about it all the time with fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean protein sources and things like that. They talk about physical activity based on your age.
Yes.
So that is very, very important, as we talk about that with everything. Getting the recommended amount of sleep, and things. And the last, the other thing was, and I think this is important for ADHD. It's important for everyone, but limiting the amount of daily screen time on TVs, computers, mobile phones, and other electronics. So, very, very important that you can help your child. Because, I mean, look, some parents will pick up on things. Some of them are very sharp parents, and they'll pick up on the littlest thing, and it could then, you could start looking at your child a bit more, and you'll pick up on things. Whereas as we know, some other parents don't see anything. All they see is a disruptive child. So let the professional make the decision.
You hit it on the nail in that, and how to treat it. Really, I mean, it's other than, it's the lifestyle habits. Get the child outdoors more often, doing activities so that you can keep their minds fresh and distracted from the mundane stuff, but you're giving them stimulus from nature, from the outdoors, sunshine, that kind of stuff, and potentially helping them to socialize and engage with other kids more as well. There was a kid that I grew up with, and for a good part of my early years, and I remember my mother never really liked the kid because he had, and I look back at that and I think, man, he had ADHD, definitely. But he was a great kid, and he's grown up as an adult now. I look at him as quite he's a nice guy, he's a good man. But in those days, this kid he was a nightmare to many parents, and then your parents don't want your kids playing with those kids, but it's not like they're doing any harm to anybody. They're just hyperactive, and sometimes it's good to have one of those kids in the group, that does take the bull by the horns literally and rides with life. It's, I don't know where I was leading onto that with that, but it's about the lifestyle, and food is very much a big part in this. Depending on what nutrition you're putting into that child's body, or that child's putting into their body, is also going to play a significant part in their overall health, their brain functioning. Because remember, this is stemming from the brain, right? So you want to be putting the right nutrients into the brain, to ensure that the child has a healthy functioning cognitive abilities. So
yeah, absolutely. And as you know, we always talk about the gut and brain axis, and that's a very, very important thing to take in consideration. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is obviously omega-3. Okay, we talk about it quite a bit of the time, but omega-3 can reduce the symptoms of ADHD in children. Okay, that is a fact. Okay, so if you have a child with behavior disorder, then you got to start looking at omega-3 fatty acids. All right, because there are studies out there that note that children with ADHD have lower blood levels of omega-3 fatty acids than their healthy peers. All right. So, and I think it's very, very important. Now, what does omega-3 do? It helps improve inattention and task completion, which is the things that we mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. They also decrease hyperactivity, impulsiveness, restlessness, and aggression. So that's great news, you know. And recently, researchers observed that fish oil supplements, you know, what we're talking about is the algae oil, are one of the most promising treatments for ADHD. So, if you need to know some more about that, then we'll be happy to talk to you, or even work with you with your doctor on that.
And remember, you mentioned algae. We have the algae version as well. You know, we have a vegan version.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, vegan version.
Derived from algae directly, which is where the omega-3 comes from.
Whatever omega-3 you use, whether it's something to do with us or not, make sure it's a top quality one.
Yeah,
there's lots of rubbish out there.
Preferably with some kind of polyphenol in it.
Yeah, to protect it.
Yeah. So
it gets where it should get, in other words.
Not a derivative of polyphenol, but a polyphenol.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, something with ADHD, you probably could go on and talk about it for many, many hours. However, we've touched on it. We've brought it to the attention maybe of something maybe someone forgot, or they've seen some very small signs in their child. And if we can help one person, then it's been worth doing this. Would you agree?
100%, of course.
Yeah. So
just all you need is to change one person's life.
Well, that's it, isn't it? At the end of the day, and that's the reason we do this. So,
and remember as well, we are not doctors. We don't proclaim to be doctors. Which is like, as Paul said, you know, we can talk about the subject for hours, but we're not doctors, so we're not going to talk about it for hours because, you know, we don't want to be BSing anybody at the end of the day. We just do the research and we share that with you, and hopefully you take it on board from where it comes and use it as and when required. You know, share the information, use it yourself, and make sure you're always dealing with a certified, qualified, legitimate, accredited professional.
Yeah, we've had some people love this episode, and I think thank you very much for that. You know, we do our best.
We do our best, yeah.
But as I've said it 3 times already. Always deal with professionals. I'm a functional nutritional counsellor, fully trained, and I make sure that the information we give over has been well checked, and it's with proper people. The information. So proper. So, you know, fact checked and things like that. Again, you have to be careful with that even. But however, so if you need anything, get in touch with us, ask us questions. We don't know, we'll push you in the right direction of the right people to get the information. Also, you know, if you comment on this video, take part in a bit of dialogue. Love this video, as some of you have already done, and if you think it's worthwhile, share it with someone else that might need the information. So with that, we've said enough, and have a fantastic week. Warren, do you want to just say
what needs to be said? Help us to change as many lives as is possible.
Absolutely. Great. Have a great week, everyone. See you next week.
Ciao.
Cheers.